Holden Lindblom, our guest on today's show, enlisted in the Army as a fire supporter and served for 4 years, both in Italy with the 173rd and with the 101st, before deciding to pursue his degree. Through a unique path, he ended up graduating from Stanford and going on to chart his way through the business world, starting several companies. He currently is the founder of Vetrafi, a financial services company dedicated to providing modern banking solutions for service members and their families, and an alternative to some of the major players in the banking industry. We discuss many of the lessons he's learned as an entrepreneur and how the military prepared him for the challenges he's overcome. So let's get into it. Most people you talk to when transitioning out of the military have never actually transitioned out themselves. You're probably getting a bunch of opinions from people who plan on staying in until retirement and have no idea how to actually show empathy for your situation. This podcast is about providing fresh perspectives and a front row seat for conversations with successful veterans doing big things after leaving the military.
So
That's exciting. And so this podcast is great for you. You're interviewing people about transitioning as you're going through the process itself. That's fantastic.
yeah, well, Griffin and I both learned so much, but I feel like there was also more to want. So I think we're trying to just provide something that maybe we didn't get. We, on our own volition, went out and reached out to people and tried to figure out, we're pretty long term, can we do for the next 5 to 10 years, right? But not everybody thinks that that's doable or right in front of them. So we're at least trying to create bridges.
That's awesome. And Griffin, you were in the 173rd?
Jack and I actually both met in the 173rd.
Okay.
We were in the CAF squadron though, so up in Germany, but still technically 173rd. It was a phenomenal time. Spent plenty of time down in Vicenza though.
Yeah. I was in 2 units, but so, I mean, sample size, not that many, but I loved my time at the 173rd. Actually, a couple of my friends, PCS to Hawaii as their second duty station. But yeah, Vicenza was amazing. And then doing our training rotations up in Grafenwehr and Hohensfeld, I did JFO and Ramstein, I think. Now, granted, going in the summertime was fun. Going in the wintertime, a little less fun in southern Germany. But yeah, I don't know. That left such a good impression on me.
Spent some cold nights in Hohenfels, that's for sure.
Yeah.
That's one of the places. There's 2 places in Germany that we did training, and both the only 2 times my toothpaste is ever frozen. That's how cold it was.
Yeah. It's great. It's fun being in Germany, especially in the South, and you go to Munich or whatever. But yeah, for trading purposes, not always the best, depending on the season.
Yeah, no kidding. And you're in New York, right? You're in the city?
I'm in New York now. Yeah. So Upper East Side, get to pay an extra penny for the brick wall behind me. But I love it here. It is fun.
And what took you there?
Yeah. So when my first startup, so after graduating Stanford, launched Pico Mart out in Boston. After we kind of wound down things there, my fiance got a private equity job here. And between Boston and New York, I was like, okay, let's do it. It's crazy. I mean, when you look at amount of funding startups get, San Francisco #1, New York just a little notch below, Boston's #3, but I mean it's a massive jump. So having kind of struggled and seen what the raising environment was in Boston, I was like, okay, I'm happy to go there. You moved out to Boston for me for my startup. Let's move to New York for you. And then that afforded me the opportunity to explore different options and launch stuff. And now with Vetrafi being in fintech, it's like, okay, we're in New York now. Like this is the home of it, right?
Awesome. Well, I want to get more into your startup experience as well, but maybe we could just jump in with a little bit more about kind of specifics on your military experience. And then we love to just focus, your background is pretty vast. So we'd love to focus on your transition specifically, what it was like. We'd love to hear a high level of what you did in the Army as well, but what it was like transitioning out and kind of steps you took as that process unfolded.
Yeah. So for me, I joined the military or the Army specifically on the enlisted side. So growing up, terrible student, moved in elementary school and middle school, all this other stuff. And so never really had the motivation or the kind of mindset to put effort into schoolwork. So I joined my junior year of high school or going into my senior year. So my summer going into my senior year, went to summer school to do the classes that I failed the year before. And then 15 days after graduating, I left for basic training. And so for me, the Army was a way to kind of escape my situation. I knew I wasn't going to be successful in college. And so the military was that kind of route of, hey, I'm either going to be homeless or just not doing really well, or I can do this where I can actually set myself up for future success. So that was my decision to go in. And while I was in, I got the lessons that I think the military teaches so many other people: leadership, applying yourself, signing up for something bigger than yourself, etc. So when it came to transitioning out, I felt like I had done the things I wanted to do within the military. It's like, okay, I did my deployment. I was with the 173rd. I'm with the 101st. I did these extra schools. I graduated top of my class at JFO. Now I'm ready to kind of tackle the civilian world. And when I entered in, it was like, college is never going to be for me. And when I was getting out, I was like, college is for me. I know I can do it. But it's such a daunting task. Like, you're like, well, like, what school and what do I want to major in and where do I move and how do I go from the rigidity of the military to now just being a college student? And through serendipity, my sister was taking a law school class with one of the co-founders of Services School. And he was actually also a 173rd alum grad and a former 173rd soldier, however you want to call it. He goes, oh, your brother was in the 173rd, reach out to Service School, put you in contact with an advisor. And had it not been for that, I mean, I would have done fine, but nowhere near what I kind of have accomplished so far. And they said, listen, let's be honest, your high school GPA isn't really going to get you into many places. That's fine. Go to community college, take a couple of years, build up your GPA, prove that you can actually be successful academically. Like, you proved it in the military, now prove it in college. So community college did exactly that. I mean, I got out, I moved back in with my parents in Massachusetts. I kind of accepted that fate and attended full-time community college. Eventually moved to Providence, Rhode Island, was doing the commute from Providence to Worcester, Mass, which, if anyone knows that area, it's about like 45 minutes to an hour commute every single day and morning. But really just kind of did everything in my power to get into one of the best schools I could. And so in 2017, got accepted into Stanford and Yale. And I think the world kind of became my oyster at that point of saying, okay, now where do I want to complete my college?
And so you had started the process while you were still active duty, right?
Yeah.
You'd got everything in motion through service to school and then enrolled at community college while still with the 101st, right?
Yeah. So Services School and Warrior Scholar Project were the two nonprofits that if I could give $1 million to each, I would, because Services School gave me the mentorship and the direction that I needed to feel comfortable making that transition of, okay, I'm going to go to community college. I'm going to do 2 years. I'm going to join this club, and this club. And then I'm going to apply at that 2-year mark. And hopefully I get into one of these schools. And the Warrior Scholar Project gave me the tangible skill sets I needed to be successful in community college. As silly as it sounds, it's like how to read an academic paper, how to write as a college level student, how to talk to your professors, how to show up to class, like these things that I think people take for granted. And they're like, well, like I was successful in the Army and I know how to read an FM 6-30. So therefore I should be able to do this in college. It was like, oh yeah, like reading an academic paper is very different, or how to critically analyze a piece of fiction in a writing class, or how to write a persuasive argument. Like all those things that you hadn't done 4, 5, 6, 15, 20 years while you were in the service, now you have to relearn. And I think the Warrior Scholarship Project sets up every single one of their students through that kind of academic boot camp to be like, okay, now you have the tools to be successful, whether that's at community college or a 4-year university.
Yeah. Yeah. While calling for fire with 3 days of no sleep and little food is a great skill and something that certainly has translatable pieces, it may not directly correlate to some things in the college environment.
Exactly. And I mean, it's definitely one of those, I can only speak to myself and the people I've seen. One of the disservices I think I see a lot of people making is, yeah, I've called for fire, or I went to Ranger School, or I did this, or I did that, and I was successful there. Therefore, it is a one-to-one translation. No, there's like a lot of things that you're not going to be prepared for. I took the college placement test 3 times to place into college level algebra because it's like, how much math was I actually doing in the military? And no amount of being good at JFO is going to remind me how to do college level algebra.
Drop 50.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, do the push-ups. That's not going to help me solve this problem. And so having some sort of infrastructure or framework to better yourself within those deficiencies, I think just sets you up for success.
At what point in your military service did that light kind of switch on and say, you know what, college is what I'm going to pursue? And obviously, you said leaving high school wasn't for you.
Yeah.
Military was kind of an escape type of option. When did you realize you wanted to do that? And then what did you do between then and when you actually transitioned to set that up for success?
Yeah. It was a few points in my military career. So after deployment with the 173rd, one of our company commanders was a West Point grad. There was a Green to Gold program. And so they were like, hey, do you want to go to West Point? We can sign your paperwork and all that. And that was probably the first time I started thinking like, do I want to go to college? Is this an opportunity? I explored a few opportunities. Do I want to go to selection? Do I want to go to Ranger School? What do I want to do out of my military career? And this was like just another option that was presented to me. And I did the math and I was like, okay, it's 1 year prep school. It's then 4 years of West Point, then another, I think it was 6-year contract. So I'm looking at 10, 11 years of committing to something. At 19 years old, that felt like a huge, huge commitment that I just wasn't sure about. And so I was like, not quite the time. Let me see what else the military has to offer. I then got offered to just extend my contract in Italy, and I loved the unit. And I was like, if I extend here, I'm probably going to reenlist. And if I reenlist, I could see the slippery slope of I might be doing 20. And it felt like I've seen one unit and I love it. And I love the leadership and all these other things. But I wanted to see what else the military had to offer. And I felt like if I was going to make this decision of, do I want the military to be this career for me? I should at least see another unit, right? Because I might be able to extend now, but there's no way I'm doing 20 years, the 173rd and only the 173rd, right? So when I made that decision to PCS and go to the 101st, it was probably a year into that where I was like, things aren't quite the same. I don't really, no offense, Tennessee. And I had nothing against Tennessee. I was just like, I went from doing a 6-mile run on the cobblestones of Italy to the flats of Tennessee. It's not quite the same.
We get it. Nothing
scenery
can hold up to it. It's just different.
Exactly.
No,
So I'm going to sound incredibly spoiled here in terms of PT and all that stuff. But I think there was a few things. And then, as forward observer, they were transitioning to division artillery. And I was like, I don't know. There seems to be some bigger changes within the Army. I'm not really liking this as much. And then it just kind of felt like these were the things I wanted to do. I wanted to deploy. I wanted to go to a unit. I did these schools. And it felt like the things I would be doing the next 5-10 years just wasn't really adding up. And so as I was getting to kind of the 1.5-year mark where they start to ask you, hey, you planning to re-enlist and all of that, was when I had that kind of realization or just the self-reflection of, do I really want to re-enlist? What would I be doing if I re-enlist? Or do I want to try the college route? And through, I think, that connection to service school, I was like, okay, I now have the confidence that this is the right decision for me to transition out.
If there's someone thinking, I want to go down this route, going to undergrad right now, they're considering getting out. Is it as simple as just reach out to service to school and let them walk you through it? Or what other steps do you advise them to take?
Yeah. I mean, first, reach out to service to school or reach out to Warrior Scholar Project. I do think that's like the first step every single individual should take. I don't think it's as important to understand what you're going to major in. Obviously, try to have an idea, but more likely than not, it's going to change. I mean, my major changed, I think, 3 or 4 times during my 5 years of schooling. So it's, talk to some people who are already out, understand their transition. But if you don't have that network, find the network. And I think those are what those 2 organizations do. But then to answer the bigger questions, like, do I want to move back home, whatever that might be? Do I want to stay in the area that I'm already in? Am I using, and now I'm going to forget my acronyms from when I was in the TA, tuition assistance? While you're in, like, do you want to take advantage of that? Or do you want to have a clean slate? I think there's 1.5 million ways, or there's a handful of ways that you can go to school, right? And then you got to figure out like what's the best for you. If you have a family, that might look a little different than if you're single or if you can move in with a friend or a family member. So I think figuring out the big picture stuff is going to be important as you figure out the like more granular, what school do I want to go to? What major do I want to take, etc.
And I imagine
Right.
community college was a better, maybe a more gradual off ramp than just jumping in both feet at Stanford, right? I'm going to have to imagine that would be a bit of an abrupt
Yeah.
wake up to some people.
I know people who have done it and have been successful. So I don't want to deter anyone from that path. I would highly recommend people not to go that path. I'm a big supporter of community college regardless. So obviously I'm biased. I went to community college. I saw success. So that's always the route that I kind of promote. But to your point, it just makes that transition so much easier. And there's probably some real hard charging people who are like, well, I don't want easy, blah, blah, blah. But it's okay. But at the same time, there's going to be so many other changes in your life that give yourself the wins that you can get. Don't make it harder on yourself. And it's going to be plenty difficult, the community college route. And I just see people make that transition a little bit smoother where I had one-on-one conversations with all my professors. I could go to any office hour and be the only student there. I knew all the deans. I was in every single club. It was so much easier to stand out in that environment than the Stanford environment. And even after 2 years of community college, it was such a culture shock and academic shock going to some place like Stanford, not only because it went from the semester system to the quarter system, but like you go talk to your professor and there's 30 other people in the room and you're like one of many voices. So for somebody like me who like wants that individual attention and be like, well, here are my questions and this is what I would need to learn. It's an adjustment period. And it's very valuable for most people to, I think, kind of do that crawl, walk, run.
That's a great takeaway. And I think people really think that they can just jump into it and they want what they want now. But a recurring theme across many of the podcasts has been just like, hey, you have to put the effort in. And in your case, and in a lot of people's cases, that effort that you're putting in ahead of time led to the success you had at Stanford, it seems, right? And if not that you weren't capable, anybody can deal with it. But you might have not had the worldview or the ability to go in there and handle that 30-person room had you not had the 2 years to really hone in on yourself and figure out what you wanted to do. I love that. I think that's definitely something that people should keep in mind. You don't have to accomplish it today. There's steps you can take that enable success.
Yeah, I mean, it's you don't go to selection or range of selection or whatever. You go to basic training first, then you go to AIT, then you go to the, it's just like the military in the same route as you got to get the basics down first. And that's what community allows. And I mean, to your point of, oh, I just want to get it done. I think there are people who are, I was fortunate or in a position where I got out of the military at 22, I think. So I was still relatively young. I even felt that, well, I'm 22 and I'm going in with a whole bunch of 18-year-olds. And so I feel like I need to progress faster so that I don't have that disparaging like age gap. And then obviously people who get out in their late 20s or early 30s might feel that a little bit more. But once you get there, it really doesn't matter. And that's maybe a cliche to say, but I never once noticed that age gap in the sense of, yeah, you're going to class or doing your quizzes. And it is like an individual thing. And outside of like group projects, like you can still make it work.
I'm speaking to myself as much as I am to anyone else, but I've felt that being behind, getting out of the military and jumping into the civilian world. And I think it's a good thing to hold in tension, right? And you want to have that kind of come from behind, like almost underdog mentality where you're accelerating the learning curve. You're getting up to speed a lot faster than most. But at the same time, I guarantee you, no matter what part, if you're 20 years out of the service, 30 years out of the service, or 4 years out of the service, you're not behind. And in fact, you're going to accelerate a lot faster than anyone else and quickly make up and surpass those that have maybe been in the industry longer than you or already, started school earlier than you, whatever it is. So speaking to myself, but also anyone else listening, that it's okay. You're not behind and you've actually got some very marketable, very important skills that are going to pay huge dividends for you whatever direction you head. Holden, with as far as the next steps you took after graduating from Stanford, is that when you jumped into your first startup kind of immediately, or what did that look like?
Yeah. So talking about changing majors, when I got out, I thought I'm going to do economics. I'm going to go into investment banking. This is the route for me. This is what I hear a lot of veterans who are quote unquote successful doing. And I ended up getting an equity research job my first summer. I heavily disliked it. It just wasn't for me. The culture of banking, the kind of things that I was doing wasn't giving me kind of personal joy or even like kind of professional satisfaction. And that left me in a position where I was like, oh crap, like for the past 3 or 4 years, I thought this was going to be my route. Now I did an internship and I don't want to do this. What should I be doing? And I got super fortunate to be able to do ZX Ventures my second summer, which is the incubator accelerator arm of Anheuser-Busch. And that was what kind of gave me the exposure to startups. Obviously, I knew of startups attending Stanford, but this was kind of the first time I got hands-on experience building something within a corporate environment, pitching to investors, all that. And so when I graduated in 2020, I actually had a job with a startup that was selling into restaurants. They sold into restaurants. They just raised their round. COVID hit. And so all the restaurants closed down. So they were like, a couple of weeks before I started, they're like, yeah, so we don't need you. And I think my response was, yeah, that's fair. Makes sense to me. Like I wouldn't bring me on either during a global pandemic and all the restaurants are closed and you sell to restaurants. So there I was, I had graduated a quarter early specifically to work with this company, global pandemic, everything's shut down. And I'm like, and I say this jokingly, sort of, I don't want to apply to job. I don't want to update my resume and apply to jobs. So I was like, well, what can I do? And I just said, let's take all the experience I gotten from the military, I'd started a nonprofit and then my past couple internships. Let me just see what I can build. And along with some classmates, started iterating on some ideas. And we were super fortunate to raise kind of a pre-seed round right at the kind of onset of the thinking of through that idea. So within 2-3 months, I went from losing my job to like thinking through an idea, building a concept, a pitch deck, and like raising a small pre-seed to like actually kind of sustain us for a couple of years, for about 1.5 years. And
All
so
during COVID, right?
All during COVID. So all remote, just that time we're like, world might be ending. Who knows? Let's see what happens. And it was a time. It was so much fun having that like opportunity to just be like, let's just figure it out. And through that experience, as a first-time founder, you're going to make just so many mistakes. And I made so many mistakes, like more than I can count. But it was so valuable. And, we got to eventually go live. It turned into what PicoMart was. We got to go live in Boston and like generated revenue. And so going through that journey of an idea on a piece of paper to like building stuff in my dad's garage from stuff we bought from Home Depot to like an actual machine in an apartment complex, like generating revenue was like incredible. And being able to then translate that into my future work was truly, truly great.
Yeah, that's amazing. And what was the company doing?
Yeah. So PicoMart was a smart fridge kiosk that provided fresh local produce to apartment tenants. So autonomous grocery store right there in your lobby. You could grab whatever you wanted. You just swipe your card, it'll unlock the door. We had sensors on each shelf that detect what you taken. So it'll only charge you once you close the door. So trying to compete with that kind of 15-minute or less delivery, but instantaneous gratification. And what we kind of learned from our findings was the reason why people didn't adopt delivery was that they wanted to kind of see, touch, and smell the products that they were buying. And so it was like, how do we bring the grocery buying experience into these apartments? And then we targeted Boston because it's a fairly large like food desert. So anyone who lived in the city didn't necessarily have easy access to grocery stores. So it was like, how do we get it so you don't have to wait 15 minutes? You just go out your door and it's right there for you.
How did it conclude?
So concluded, yeah. So I'll say that we did not provide positive ROI for our investors. It was an opportunity for us to test an hypothesis. We disproved some kind of key assumptions. And so it was a great idea in the sense of we have customers, we're generating revenue. People truly enjoyed us. And we got to a point where apartment complexes wanted us because it was a great value prop for them because it was like, hey, we got a grocery store in our building. But the unit economics didn't make sense. And food is a very tricky thing. It's low margin. We tried to solve for that a bit, but then hardware is also a tricky business to go into because it's very expensive. You need physical places. So kind of everything combined made it really difficult to turn it into a viable business. But I would say with the amount of funding we got, we definitely were able to do a whole bunch, being as scrappy as we were. And the fact that we even generated some revenue and got customers and into some buildings, I think were some successes. But at the end of the day, the next raise was going to be incredibly difficult. We weren't really seeing the investor appetite at that point, and it was time to kind of call it quits. Not to quote your previous podcast, but I think I was listening to it and he said, it's not about calling it quits. It's just sometimes you get to a point where, hey, it's just not working out. And that's where it was, because coming from the military, it's never accept defeat, never quit. And it was a big challenge for me being like, man, like I'm not getting a good return for my investors. Like I returned the capital that we had left, but to be like, yeah, we weren't able to raise the next round, or we weren't able to build a model that kind of was successful, it was a growing lesson for me, and definitely a tough time. Like, man, I was taught for the past X amount of years never to quit. And here I am kind of tossing in the towel, but everything ended up well. And now with Vetrafi, Context Ventures, who invested in Comart, invested in us. So it goes to show, as long as you end things on a good note and are transparent and truthful to investors, like you'll have a second chance. So with Vetrafi, I joined Context Ventures about a year ago as a entrepreneur in residence. So some of my time was kind of on the investing side. The other side was just, thinking through ideas that we really wanted to build. And this was something that Tim and I had multiple discussions on, and something he was super passionate about. Let's look at the existing landscape of who's providing services to veterans and service members. The kind of three big players we found weren't necessarily doing a great job at providing products that build the financial health of service members. Everyone on this call served, so we all know the person who went off base, bought the Ford F-150 or the Mustang at 32% APR, and is in a position where they are in a giant financial hole that they can't get out of. And that happens because you create an account with one of these military affinity banks. They give you a debit card. You're not building any of your credit history. You're just kind of having your money sit in an account, making less than 10 basis points. So just losing out to inflation. Then you get to your first duty station. You're like, yeah, I'm in Fort Campbell. I want a car to go out to Clarksville or Nashville, but you have no credit profiles. So a dealer will go, yeah, we'll give you this car. It's going to cost you though, unless you have a cosigner. And of course, at 18 years old, who really knows what cosigners are? So then you get that terrible deal. So what Vetrafi is really seeking to do is setting up these service members for success on relatively basic products. Credit building card that runs on credit rails. So every time you swipe your card, it gets reported to the credit bureaus. Whatever you have in your account, you can spend. You can't spend a penny over. So each month it gets paid off. So you don't have to worry about APR or late payments or anything like that. But you get to build your credit kind of seamlessly and safely. Then all the cash back and the roundup can go into your high yield savings account. And say you make a 20,000 or 30,000 bonus, that's actually making 3.25% interest rather than 10 basis points or less than 10 basis points. So relatively simple, but just looking at that small stuff, that's an extra few $100 in the pockets of these service members. And then after 6 months of reporting credit bureaus, that's actually when you get your credit score. So really, we're just trying to set them up for success and prevent them from buying that car at 25 or 30% APR.
Such an important piece to any new service member. And I assume it's very applicable for anyone in the service and those that are transitioning or have already left the service too. Is that, I assume the initial demographic is new entry service members and then expanding from there?
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, we're really targeting those kind of 18 to 20-year-olds entering into the military for the first time, more likely than not on the enlisted side, because that's where we feel like is the most, the demographic that needs the most amount of help, right? They're most likely just high school educated. They are more likely than not going to have a lot of financial literacy, because who kind of does out of high school? But I think the high school system doesn't do necessarily a great job teaching
the college
skills.
Does not matter.
We talked to some college folk who are ROTC, and they're like, I have a credit card from my parents. I'm like, do you know what your credit score is? And they're like, no idea. I'm like, right. I mean, no judgment. They're like, you don't really learn about it until you need to learn about it. But the tricky thing is you went from high school where you maybe had a summer job, maybe you didn't, to now, in short, 100% discretionary income. So I mean, no wonder 37% of service members are uncomfortable in their financial situation and that they're 4 times more likely to be victims of payday loan lenders, because we're giving 18-year-olds free will on not unlimited money, but they're not going to go homeless. They have their insurance paid for, their food paid for, and whatever it is, $2,000 a month in money that they can spend wherever. And then we go, oh, well, why did they buy the car at 35% APRs? Well, because nobody put any guardrails. And not to say that Vetrafi is going to prevent, at the end of the day, you can spend the money however you want. We can't prevent anyone from doing it. And we are very transparent in the sense of we're not going to make perfect service members, right? Like, people aren't going to be financial angels when they're on the Vetrafi system, but there are small, simple things that we can do, that we can automate, that we can set you up for success, that it's passive, that so you don't have to think about it. And just those things make you incrementally better. And so if we can make you 10, 20, 30% better than the alternative, that's success in our eyes. So people will make mistakes somebody inevitably is going to buy that Ford F-150 on the Vetrafi platform. But if we can prevent the majority from making those mistakes, that's a success for us.
Sure. Well, I think so common. It's like people just see what the monthly payment is. They don't see what the APY on that is. And it's such a scam. Like, you're only paying $400 a month, which technically they can afford, but they don't see the actual cost behind that.
Yeah. I mean, if you're buying $40,000 car, you might be just paying the interest. So it's okay. My monthly payments are low, but it's your loan is never going down. Now, a couple of years, you want to sell it, you're upside down on your truck and you can't afford the other one. Now you got to pay out that loan. And now, well, what do I do here? And it's just because nobody knows, like, nobody's teaching it. Nobody's just letting people be aware of it. And sometimes it's not about influencing somebody's decision one way or the other. Just, hey, here are the facts, right? Here's what this means in terms that you can understand. And sometimes that's enough to be like, okay, yeah, this is a bad decision.
And these kids are plunging into a culture where cars are kind of the way to be cool. The military, we don't generally focus on home ownership as much as we probably should, or some of the other things that you can do with money. And the way to seem cool is to have a nice car, because that can come with you to the next duty station. And I love the idea of what you're doing, because just that first step, if all they do is get a credit card that points out that they're going to build their credit, and that points out that their money is going to make some money for them, now that can be the snowball that they can take and be like, oh, I should care about my credit. I should care about my return on some of my savings. And if that alone gets them to do some research, it's pretty easy to research all of this stuff. But if there's no impetus for you to actually make that decision to go learn about it, and you're not surrounded by anybody else who's doing it, then you're right. They're going to fall into that trap, and they're going to absolutely just kind of go down the wrong path, whether they intend to or not. And it's going to be harder to work their way out of that hole, as opposed to what you're talking about. They start with you, right? They're pretty much even keel. When you join the military, unless you have crazy debt that you're entering the military with, you're pretty much just starting from square one. And if you can take that next step forward, even if it's a small step, I love what you're doing, man. I think it's great. And I think although it seems like a small thing, that snowball will absolutely build. And I love that.
100%.
Yeah. And we're excited about it. And I mean, I could go into ad nauseum all the things that we want to build or look into. But I mean, without saying who, there's a recent competitor who got it fined for violations with the Service Member Relief Act, which is something so simple that, for those who don't, it just kind of caps your interest if you're deployed. And there are certain things that you can and can't do when you qualify for it. And we talked to a provider who said the average bank has 31 steps to go from you're not a service member, the CRA, you're not eligible, to being eligible takes 31 steps. And we can do it in one step. And that's something where, listen, if you're deployed or you're about to deploy, you don't want to spend an hour on the phone with your institution, try and be like, okay, I'm deploying, I'm with this, and explaining that. And for us, we can do a check, we can see it, we can move you over to that immediately. And I think so many people demonize credit, and to some extent, credit can be a very dangerous game. And that's why we're starting with secured, right? It's, you hand an 18-year-old $4,000 unsecured credit card, they're probably going to max out that $4,000 unsecured credit card and now deal with that APR associated with and paid off. And for us, it's again, going back to the transition, qual run, right? Get used to an unsecured card, get used to those auto payments and not going over the amount that you have in your account. And then we can open up eventually down the line to unsecured as you build those good habits.
Man, I would venture to say that probably 95% or more of at least the infantry and armor BOLIC lieutenants that I interacted with or was in a cohort with would hugely benefit from this, because even more so than the 18-year-old private or whoever is entering the service, those guys have a little bit more income. Like Jack mentioned, they probably have zero school debt because they did ROTC or went to an academy. And all of a sudden they're the ones buying an F-250 that's jacked up and has all kinds of bells and whistles and is just trying to be half an inch taller than the guy beside them in his F-250. So yeah, I think this is great, man. I'm really curious, Holden, you mentioned when you kind of took the slap in the face on the first startup, decided to move on and pursue the next thing. Do you have a personal board of advisors, or did you have somebody speaking in your ear that was influential in that decision and that has continued or just still part of that influence today?
Yeah, I mean, multiple, right? I mean, the first that comes to mind, I'll say him by name. I mean, Tim Shaw, right? He personally believed in me with that investment in Picomart. And I could call him up any time of day. And when I was coming to that conclusion of, I don't know if this is going to work out, I felt like I had that like kind of personal responsibility to him to be like, yeah, I feel like I'm letting you down. And the way he framed it and the way that he made me feel okay with that decision of being like, I have to make this tough call to like wind down this business made me so comfortable in the fact that we stayed in contact. It took me a little while to get comfortable being like, I think I want to start another company again. And throughout that journey, I could call him up, be like, hey, there's this opportunity. What do you think about this? Should I do that and this? And this entrepreneur residence role came in and he just sent me, I was out in SF for a conference and he sent me down. He was like, okay, let's whiteboard this out. What are your options? What do you want to do? And he wasn't trying to influence me one way or the other. It was just guiding me through my thought process and what I wanted to do and be like, okay, here are your options. Here's my opinion on this and here's my opinion on this. But at the end of the day, what do you want to do? And I'll support you through that. So having him, I mean, as a mentor has been just so valuable. But then there's plenty of others that, whether they're just friends that I've been friends with for a while and they're in a similar industry, and I can call them up and be like, hey, what are your thoughts? How will you think about this? Or just others right now in the fintech space where I'm coming up on a decision, I'm not quite sure what to go, and I can just call them up and ping pong ideas off of. So I think having that friend group / mentor group or just board of advisors is incredible because it gets so lonely. And a lot of the times there's no right or wrong answer. It's, do whatever you want, right? You'll be fine either way. But just having somebody who can kind of coach you through that thought process and have you kind of verbalize your own thoughts, it typically guides you to the decision you want to get to.
Yeah. And as tactically or practically as you feel comfortable, how would you recommend somebody kind of building that board of advisors? Because I think it's incredibly important, even as they're leaving the military, to have that already put in place rather than start sifting through the millions of options and then trying to seek out some sort of guidance.
Yeah. I mean, my route has always been the people that you've kind of interacted with. So whether that's potentially a company commander or senior NCO, somebody that you've interacted with in the past. Obviously, as you get out of the service and you network more and go to more events and you build your kind of professional network, I think it does become a little easier. There's been people who just cold reached out to me on LinkedIn who are a student at U Chicago. And they're like, oh, you were in the Army. I was in the Army. I'm also interested in startups. Would you be willing to talk to me? And I always try to take a call if somebody has reached out to me cold and just expressed interest. So if you don't have that existing network, go on LinkedIn, write a nice little LinkedIn message and ask for 30 minutes, 15 minutes and just say, hey, I would love to hear your story, or I'm in this point in my life. I would love to get your feedback on my next steps. And build it from there. And so there's been a few people who I've mentored just through those cold outreaches. So there's kind of multiple ways to do it. Start with people, and it's usually never formal. It's never, hey, do you want to be my mentor? It's just, hey, from time to time, can I call you or just reach out to them and to get thoughts and opinions. And it will naturally kind of evolve into that more quote unquote formal relationship.
And we've talked about several times, if you just continue to update them on the advice that they gave, you took it and had X result. If you just continue to give them that feedback, people love that. They love knowing that, for one, their advice is being taken, but two, that they're keeping up with someone who's achieving things and they're a small part of that. So yeah, to your point, it doesn't have to be a big formal ask.
And it feels good. I mean, right. I mean, granted, can't mentor 100 people, but like when people reach out from time to time and it's 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there, it feels good. And then also, I was also in that spot, right? I mean, just a few years ago, there was people in my life who mentored me or took me out for lunch and walked me through these steps and all of this other stuff. So to be able to give back in even the most minor way, I mean, selfishly, it feels good for me too. So it's, hey, I'm where I'm at today because of mentors in my life. If I can even be half of that to somebody else, that's.
I imagine there's quite a few new skills in what you're currently doing. How did you learn those? How did you go from a fire support team member in the Army to doing a fintech startup that seems pretty complex? I'm just curious how you go from A to B, because I think a lot of people are out there thinking, well, I too was calling for fire in the Army, or I was doing whatever job in the Air Force. And how do I go from that to a very niche, specialized startup like what Holden's doing?
Yeah. I mean, you just have to have that thirst for knowledge and never be okay with the kind of status quo. And when I mean status quo, I mean the status quo of what's considered acceptable in terms of getting your job done. If you're saying, I just need to learn this in order to kind of do my job, and that's where I'm going to stop it, like you're not going to see success that way. Speaking of like mentors and all that, I've been catching up with them just a few weeks ago. One of my team leaders, when I got to the 173rd, I'll call him out by name, Ben Stecker. He'll like the call out. I hated him when I was in. And I tell him this all the time. Like, I hated your guts because in preparation for JFO and all this other stuff, there was all this, what's the Cas9 line? What's the CC85 line?
You're the prompter, you're saying.
Exactly. And then he would ask all these questions. And the second you started getting one too many correct, it'd be like, what's the max range of a 9-inch, whatever cruise missile on fired from a destroyer off the Atlantic? And you're like, who needs to know this? Like, I have my J file, like I'll flip through it and find the number. And he's, that's not enough. Like, you need to know that book front to back and every single page. And as much as I hated him at the time, that's with me throughout my military career and into college and my professional career. I don't know anything about CRMs and like Salesforce or HubSpot. Like, I'm going to watch a whole bunch of YouTube videos and I'm going to stay up late and I'm going to figure this out. I don't know this part of fintech. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to conferences. I'm going to meet people. I'm going to talk to them. I'm going to learn from experts. And I'm never going to get to a point where I'm like, oh, I feel like I know enough. It's no, there's something else I can learn. Like, I can go into, there's the basics of KYC and AML and BSA and all this other stuff. But then it's, okay, but what are the specific laws within this state? Or what are the actual policies that we're going to be putting in place? Or like, in this scenario, what do we need to do versus this? And we obviously have a fantastic compliance officer who handles it, but I must be the most annoying person ever because I'm always like, well, why? And like, why are we doing that? And so what is this policy? And like, how do we do that? And is there a reason we do it this way versus that way? So it is, surround yourself by smart people who understand the space, but then to do everything in your power to just learn it, right? I mean, especially as an entrepreneur, I know graphic design and Photoshop, and I know CRMs, and I know Facebook ads and Google ads. And I mean, when I got out of the Army, I knew none of that. But you're like, I need to run Google ads. I can't afford to hire somebody to do Google ads at that point. Time to learn how to do Google ads. We need some graphic design. We don't want to spend money on a graphic designer. Let me see if I can figure it out for the time being. And then as you grow and you get funding and all that, and then obviously you could pay for those services and get experts. But I think necessity drives a lot of that innovation of just, if I'm bootstrapping this and I can't afford it, time to learn it right now myself, right? And get to a point where you can afford to hire somebody for it.
You're probably not giving yourself enough credit as well of being able to make those connections between the things that you're learning. And I think it's clear just listening to you that when you're learning these things, you also have to make the bridges between all the things you're learning, and creating those connections is really what's quite impactful to success in business. And I think your ability to ask the questions of the expert that you have on staff is great. You have to know you have to know a lot about whatever they're doing, but you also need to know a lot about everything else, because that connection is what they're not really worried about, and that's where you're the glue that holds everything together.
Yeah, I mean, it is important to just be okay looking stupid. I think, and this was one thing that I kind of saw in the equity research job that I tend to like more in the start world. With like within banking, I think there's always this fear of I don't want to ask this question publicly because I might look stupid or well. And I think to some extent in the military too, you kind of like, well, if I don't know it, I'll save it for later and kind of figure it out. Or a lot of times in startups, because it's so complex and so wide spanning, like I tend to see people being more comfortable being like, I just don't know what that means. Can you explain it to me? Or this was my interpretation of what you said. Am I completely wrong or am I on the right track? So as quickly as you can become being like, I don't know what you're talking about, break it down as simple as possible for me, better you're off. And then you can start to build those connections as you learn from those mistakes or those questions you've asked.
You mentioned all the lessons learned from your first startup that I have to imagine have played huge dividends in what you're doing now. Do you have, and not to put you on the spot here, but do you have one example of something that is a really great translation? I love digging into kind of the building blocks that have positioned you for where you are now and for success.
I could go a lot of different routes. Everything from like investor relations to like employee relationships and managing your expectations and drive with others and how to deal with co-founder disputes. Like there could be an entire hour-long conversation on just like mentality and mindset and like people skills within startups.
Maybe we do that in a future conversation.
Exactly. Yeah.
What about co-founder or partner relations? I'd love to maybe one of the lessons learned there and how you've taken that forward.
Yeah. I mean, I'll answer that. And then, the other one is, I mean, for product, right? It's the sooner you can get a product out there, the better. As much as I knew, hey, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to be an MVP. You do get to that point where, well, if I could just do this, then I can go live and then it starts to slow it down. So, I mean, speed is so important for startups and being okay releasing something that isn't necessarily perfect or isn't exactly how you envision is something that you have to quickly get comfortable with, because the sooner you can get a product out there, the sooner you can kind of start to iterate on it and kind of build on it. The relationships with like employees or co-founders and all that, it's something that, at least for me, was a challenge transitioning from the military to kind of the civilian world. Because in startups, it's usually a very flat in structure. Everyone has their own opinions. People are going to share it with you. And in the military, it's like, I'm the sergeant or I'm the team leader, I'm the platoon sergeant, blah, blah, blah. What I say kind of goes. And obviously you try to take some feedback in, but it's once we set the mission, this is what it goes. And there is a level of that, obviously, with being a founder of saying, here's my decision. But when you work with a co-founders where it's maybe a little bit more nebulous, and at the end of the day, and it's going to sound obvious as I say it, it's everyone wants what's best for the company. Sometimes people just have different opinions on what that means or how you go about it. And when you're so invested, though, when you're like, I have my own money or my own equity and my own blood, sweat, and tears invested in this, you feel like if we don't go with my route, that's the end, right? Because I have so much involved. But then trying to remember, well, this person also has the same level of commitment and dedication and all this other stuff. And being okay letting go of some of that power and being trusting that other individual is a challenge. And especially if you came from a leadership in the military where sometimes your word goes and you can push back, but doesn't matter, to a structure where, no, you two need to figure it out. It's like somebody needs to give, or you need to figure out the compromise or whatever. There's just a lot more politicking. And I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way, but it's like setting expectations, not always being in a position where you're going to be the quote unquote winner, and understanding like, where am I willing to let up on, where am I willing to stand on, etc. It's different, especially compared to the military.
Do you feel that the connection or the drive that you feel from having your own money invested is something that enables you and pushes you further, or is like the emotions tied in with that? Is that something that might cloud judgment at times?
I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, in comparison to what we raised, I put in very little on my own in comparison, right? It definitely drives it. I think there are some economic studies that show if you pay for your own college, it drives your engagement in college slightly more than those who get it for free. And so that could probably be applied to startups as well. To some extent, yes, the answer is yes. To another extent, at a certain, you raise a 10 million Series A or 20 million Series A. Again, whatever you put in probably pales in comparison to that 20 million.
But your time and sleepless nights and
But yeah, I honestly, I think it's more that than anything else. I'm up till 3 a.m, or I'm fighting tooth and nail for this contract, or I think it's much more the emotional investment of, I mean, at a certain point, like your identity gets tied to your startup, your entire life kind of revolves around it. You're doing everything in your power to see it be successful. So when you like face challenges, and also like, right, as a co-founder, whether or not this is healthy or not, I think can be debated. If something happens to the company that's a direct reflection on my leadership and my skills and like my worth, which isn't necessarily healthy, and something that I took away as a learning lesson from Picomart is it's fine to have those feelings, but it's kind of important to also be once removed from it. Of yes, a lot of the stuff that I do is a direct reflection on the company, but then there's a lot of stuff that are just outside of my control. If a company that I might be sending a contract with takes 3 weeks to respond to an email, there's no amount of follow-ups and bugging them that's going to speed that up. So like that delay is not a reflection on me. And so you just have to be kind of accepting. The short answer is sometimes having a monetary investment into your own startup can drive it, but a lot of it is those like intangibles or just like the emotional investment you have within the startup.
Holden, not to backtrack here, but you mentioned the iteration process and getting an MVP out there, minimum viable product out there, while also making sure you can add little features that might make that MVP better or more likely to find product market fit. I think that a lot of people transitioning out of the service, probably nobody wants to pitch a subpar or brief a subpar con-op to their brigade or battalion commander. And so I think, and a lot of us are naturally perfectionists as well. So I think a lot of people have to break that really bad habit formed by the military to where 60% today is probably almost always better than 100% too late or tomorrow. So did you have to deal with that? Did you kind of overcome the need to perfect things as you're pushing products out?
All the time. For Picomart, it was, we could have saved a few months had it just been like, let's just send it. Let's just ship it. Let's see what happens. And it was that kind of need of, well, I want to test this, or I want to, try this and improve this. Then once we got it out on the market, like that's where all our learnings came from, was customers coming up to us and be like, oh, I really wish it did this, or I wish I saw this. And with iterating or with building a product, you're going to, with lean startup methodology, you're going to talk to your customers, you're going to build some assumptions, you're going to try to validate them or invalidate them and build your MVP around those responses. But people will say a lot of things. They'll say a lot of things that they think are good in spirit or that they believe kind of in theory, but in practice, they're not necessarily going to follow. So for example, with Picomart, we were trying to reduce food waste by increasing more frequent purchases rather than a large purchase at the end of the week. And then that cabbage goes bad before you get to use it, or you change your mind on what you want to cook. And so it was like, let's try to create these micro purchases so that you can kind of build on that. And one of the assumptions we had was, okay, there's statistics that show that 40% of consumer food bought is wasted. So 40% food waste, horrible. And when you talk to people, you go, how much food do you waste? And how do you feel about that? And people go, oh, it's terrible. I'm always throwing out food. I feel bad about it. And so then you naturally come, well, people want to solve this pain. And I think in theory, people do. But in practice, like life is hectic. You are intending to like use that item, but then midway you get busy, you decide to go out to eat that day, or work got crazy. And so you forgot about that apple in the back of the fridge that went bad. And so we did all these studies and customer interviews and had this hypothesis that we're like, okay, well, people are saying this, but then in practice, that's not really the case, right? Because human nature is a little bit more complex than, everyone wants to probably read 30 books a year. How many people are actually reading 30 books a year? So likewise with Vetrafi, it's obviously on the compliance and the regulation side, we are crossing the T's. We can't have any mistakes or deficiencies there, but it's, do we need to build this fully fledged out product with all the bells and whistles? No. What is the core product our customer needs? Let's launch with. Like, can we provide value right away? and how do we build that? And then we can build the other stuff down the line. But let's get this first piece done correctly first, and then iterate from there.
I love the analogy of the vitamin or painkiller. I feel like Picomart, no pun intended, with nutrients and food and stuff was more of a vitamin, whereas Vetrafi seems to be a lot more of a painkiller where people maybe can't buy a car. They can't do anything because of bad credit or because of debt or crazy APY on something that they unfortunately did buy. But it seems like you're really solving a very tangible and painful problem that people have.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the hope, right? And we've obviously done the customer discovery. We've looked at the statistics and the market itself. And then when we go live, it goes back to, what do our customers want next? So many times it's investor code, like, where do you see yourself 5 years from now or 10 years from now? Which I get why they ask it, but a lot of the times it's, let's see how our customers react. Like, what do they want next? Because I could sit here and say, well, looking at my magic ball, I think we're going to have this next, and then we're going to have this. But we go live and 90% of our customers are saying, we really want this product next, or we really want to see this next. Okay, then let's adjust to that, right? So you have to be flexible and say, I have my assumptions and I think that this is what this is going to turn into, but everything will change once you go live. And that's the real kind of validating moment, or the opportunity to hear, like, how am I going to grow this?
I love seeing vision, and I love asking that question, but I've stopped asking beyond 3 years really, because Holden 5 years from now or Vetrafi 5 years from now, it's going to look exponentially different than it does today. And for good reason, because you're a savvy entrepreneur who's going to iterate, make things better, listen to customers, and ultimately solve problems that you may or may not be able to see at this point. So I love that.
Yeah. I mean, one of the greatest discussions I had or on the investing side at Context Ventures, we talked to a founder, and I think we asked a similar question. And it's like, where do you see this growing? How do you see this progressing? And his answer was, I'm not sure what the future holds within this industry. All I know is there's a problem to be solved, and I'm the person to solve it. I'm like, yeah. At this stage, at pre-seed and seed, like, that's kind of all you're looking for is, I know there's a problem and I know I can solve it. What the exact specifics of that looks like and how we go about it, I mean, it can change so much. And I think there's so many founders who kind of come out on the scene and they're like, I'm the prophet. I know exactly how to solve this, and we're going to do it this way, and blah, blah, blah. And let's talk in a year from now and let's see how accurate you are. And I'd say 99% of the time, they were pretty off on their predictions.
Hopefully that guy dropped the mic or hung up the Zoom.
I think that was the last thing he said. It was like, all right, that's it.
Right. Hey, Holden, we ask everybody the same question towards the end of the podcast, and that is for one ask and one give from our listeners. Again, you've already given so much, and you said you've listened to a couple episodes. It's definitely something that we just give you the floor. Whatever you want to ask of our listeners, and then we'll follow up with one give that you can provide for the listeners.
Join the Vetrafi waitlist, going live in January. So the more people who join the Vetrafi waitlist, obviously it looks good for us. We're trying to really make it worth it for individuals. We're allowing people who join the waitlist to file their taxes, state and federal, through our partnership with April, if they join the waitlist, a whole bunch of other goodies. So definitely do that. Otherwise, we're also hiring engineers. So anyone who wants to make intros to some software engineers, we're actively hiring for positions. One give, I'm always open, especially to the veteran community. I try to always take a call, whether that's a veteran or somebody transitioning or still in the service. I can always give my time to those individuals, whether that's, how do I transition? What school should I go to? What should I major in? Or I'm interested in startups. How do I go about it? I'm always open to doing that. So that's probably the best give that I give.
Awesome. Hold on. Love what you're doing, man. I think this is something that's so needed, something that is going to make a big difference, not only within the military community, but I'm sure much broader as well. So thanks for the hard work you're putting in there and the way that you give back to the veteran community.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. An absolute pleasure, and really enjoyed our conversation tonight.
Likewise, man. Any last final thoughts or piece of advice for someone that is considering a transition or currently going through it?
It's scarier while you're in it, and that's okay. I always see, or I frequently see people kind of attribute their military kind of career to being like, I need to be this hardened slinging, like nothing's going to phase me. And I think it's okay to be vulnerable during that transition process. It's okay to reach out for help. And then something at least I saw on the enlisted side, I don't know if they saw it on the officer side, where it's like the meme where it's like, oh, you think finals are tough and as you've deployed. And no, I've deployed and I've gone through finals. Both are kind of tough. They're their own kinds of difficulty. And I caught myself in that same boat of like, why am I so stressed about this college final? Like I deployed, I was with the 173rd. I feel like I can handle anything. It's like, yeah, well, when you're in it, it's still going to suck. And no amount of other sucky things that you did in the past is going to negate the sucky thing that you're doing now. They're just two different stressors in your life. And you'll be amazed at how quickly you get kind of comfortable and feel like, oh man, I'm going to final due tomorrow. And 9 pages and I'm only like 4 pages into my writing and like, knock it out all tonight. Yeah. So I think like just being comfortable in that, nothing will fully prepare you for it. And you'll feel emotions that you feel like you shouldn't be having because of your military service that are unavoidable.
Well said, man. Yeah. I think I had to, I ironically had to undo my college writing practices where I stretched 4 pages into 9. And then when I entered the military, they were like, this should be like a quarter of a page. What are you doing?
Yeah, exactly. And they're like, military is all about keep it simple. And in college, it's like, nope, you have 10 pages that you need to fill out. So figure it out.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on the show, man. This has been great. And best of luck with everything going forward. Look forward to following along with the Vetrafi growth and process and all the great work you guys are doing.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Veteran Ventures Podcast. If you heard something interesting or found the show to be helpful, send it to a friend who is transitioning out of the military or considering a transition. We'd also really appreciate if you left a rating and review of the show. That helps us reach more people with these amazing stories of successful veterans. We'll catch you next time on the Veteran Ventures Podcast. And until then, go do the thing. Make that decision, have that conversation, and go find your next mission.